Well, Sam Cosentino, just like that, the Metropolitan Division in the NHL just got that much more dangerous. Last year, we all know the Metro added Jack Hughes and Capo Caco, and now the Rangers, by virtue of a lucky lottery ball, will select first overall those New York Rangers, and they will add, we assume, Alexis Lafrenière to the mix. First off, is there any doubt that the Rangers are taking Alexis Lafrenière from Rimouski?
I don't think there's any doubt. I think he's the guy who's going to be selected number one. And this has been, 3 years in the making from when he came into the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League with Rimouski as the number one pick. And we've been hearing about him for that extra year because of his late birthday. So I think this is the guy. I think also, Jeff, that he's a guy who can have an impact right away based on the time lapse that these players who get picked first overall typically don't have.
The Rangers, it's a really interesting situation. So they make it into the qualifying round. They lose to the Carolina Hurricanes, but you can see where the rebuild is going here. Jeff Gorton's done a wonderful job. And I don't know if we've ever seen a case in the NHL where a team, well, a recent note anyhow, with a Hart Trophy candidate also holds the first overall draft pick. The Rangers just hit fast forward on their rebuild. Did they not, Sam?
Yeah, they sure did. And you have to like the young forwards that they have. I mean, Zibanejad has really come into his own. Panarin, as we know, is a star, especially at even strength. You look at Kravtsov, he's coming. Buchnevich is a player who looks like he's coming into his own as well. And now you're going to add Alexis Lafrenière to that mix. So Philip Hedl as well. I mean, they've done a really good job here. I mean, not even talking about Elias Anderson and what that situation still holds for the Rangers. So I really like what their young forward group has to offer. And then I look at, the three-headed monster with their goaltending situation. Yeah. And, of course, in the back end, Tony DeAngelo, what's going to happen with him? He's had such a great year, but they've got some youth and some really good players in the back end as well. This is turning into a really well-rounded team really quickly.
Keandre Miller is going to be a real good player.
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere down the road with the New York Rangers. That's on the horizon. So give us a rundown of the skill set here. So Rangers fans, listen, you're going to get Alexis Lafrenière at the draft. What are they getting in this kid?
Well, you're getting a complete player. You have to warn a little bit in the fact that if you're thinking about Connor McDavid and how dynamic he is, Nathan McKinnon and how dynamic he is, that's not what Alexis Lafrenière is. Alexis Lafrenière is a winger who gives you center-type qualities and center-type production. And what I've really liked about this player is the fact that when he came into the league as a 16-year-old, he scored 42 goals. Great. 80 points, more goals than assists. We understand that was going to be a big part of his game. Then he comes back a year later. He had 68 assists to 105 points and realizes, all right, I can be a pretty good playmaker. He goes through the adversity of the World Juniors. His play gets called out a little bit. He goes back and he realizes, okay, I can score goals. I can be a playmaker. I can go through some adversity. So he has a really good summer. He comes back, and I think this year he's added the layers of that competitiveness, physicality in his game, the consistency in his game. And now what we're looking at least at the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League level, is a dominant player, where he's 2.15 points per game, the best since Connor McDavid in the CHL, going back to his draft year. And so now what we're seeing is a guy who has the ability to grow his game. And again, we talked about this just briefly a second ago, but I like the fact that unlike McDavid, who was called to go home after his season in Erie ended, go to the combine, go to the draft, go to the conference finals, make public appearances, go to this camp, go to that camp, and then finally start the season. Well, I like the fact that he has the opportunity, Lafrenière, that he hasn't played again since March 8th, and will be able to jump into this thing, having played games somewhere, but really, kind of get a head start on the competition because of all the time off, all the time to train, plus getting into some game action. It'll be unlike any other first-round pick we've seen.
Sam, you've covered Alexis Lafrenière going back to when he lit the Q on fire as a 16-year-old. Did you see this curve for Alexis Lafrenière? Like back when he was 16, were you one of those people that were saying, this guy's going for – I know everyone was going crazy for Quinton Byfield at that time. At that point, did you look at Lafrenière and say, hold on a second, let's pump the brakes on Byfield. Let's have a look at the winger in Quebec League?
Yeah, I mean, being in Ontario, you're a little bit more biased than what I was able to see, from Quinton Byfield playing with York Simcoe. So there was an opportunity there to get a sense of, oh my gosh, this guy's massive. He can skate. He can handle the puck. The guy's unbelievable. But then getting to see Lafrenière do it at the Quebec Major Junior League level, and you're thinking, all right, well, he doesn't have quite the size or maybe that great skating ability, but he's extremely smart. He shoots the puck well with a good release and a whole ton of accuracy. And that's something that's part of his game that's probably not talked about enough. But I think you could see signs of it at 16. Mm-hmm. What for me is, I mean, you know, it's no big revelation that at this year's World Juniors is where you really started to see it. But if you roll back the tape a little bit, it's the ability to, I think, go through some adversity as he did the year earlier, you know, getting called out on a team that didn't medal on home soil for the first time, I think, ever. And then being able to come back and take that disappointment and really spinning it into a positive experience to be named the team's MVP, even though that little bit of adversity happened throughout the tournament when he got injured. And so at that point, I said to myself, all right, we've got something really, really special on our hands. And you can look at the points and you can look at a bunch of different things. But when you talk to some coaches who don't normally coach him, like Dale Hunter had him at the World Juniors, and when you get to hear what other players in his peer group say about him, that to me speaks volumes about what this guy is going to be here at the next level.
I want to talk from the from Lafreniere's point of view here. He's represented by Emily Castonguay. So now she will be the first female agent with a first overall draft pick. What does going to the Rangers, in your estimation, Sam, mean for Alexis Lafrenière? No disrespect to the Minnesotas and the Floridas, etc., but this is the Big Apple here. What does this mean for this kid?
Well, it's huge. I mean, if you just look at the interview that David conducted with him on draft lottery night, he was very clearly set up with his Bauer sticks and his Gatorade bottle. So already there's that part of the endorsement in place. And now you're going to go to a market like the Big Apple and, you know, what's likely going to be a city that continues to be starved for its sports experiences and looking for that star. Well, I think the opportunities are endless in terms of what he's going to be able to be provided with off the ice. You know, the interesting dynamic there is, and maybe it's an attractive thing with some of the shifting we're seeing in the world right now, is English is essentially a second language for Lafrenière. So how's that going to play out over the course of being in the Big Apple, where obviously Americans in the first language being English? So maybe there's that element that I think he can take advantage of playing in a market like New York, showing a little bit of that diversity.
Okay, so Alexis Lafrenière, we've talked plenty about. Let's go to the rest of your top 10. We now know what the top 15 is going to look like when we have the NHL draft. Walk us through your top 10 here. And I know you spent a lot of time battling, oh, do I want Jamie Drysdale ahead of Jake Sanderson, or do I want it the reverse? But before we get there, we have a German and we have a big power center from the Sudbury Wolves. Take it through STUTZLE and Quinton Byfield.
Yeah, well, I think when I look at the LA Kings, and I think STUTZLE's the guy there. I mean, did he bypass Byfield throughout the course of the year? Yes, he was very successful playing in Anaheim, a big piece of their success there on the power play. Goes to the World Juniors, is very good for Germany there. And then you contrast that to what Byfield's experience is at the World Juniors, and everyone's looking, oh, Lafrenière, Byfield, so on and so forth. But you have to understand that he's 10 months younger. So I love Byfield, the size, the skating ability, the puck handling ability. I love the fact that I think he's a little more raw. I think there's a little bit of immaturity to him. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that, and I think there's a much higher ceiling for Byfield in that regard. But when I look at Tim STUTZLE, I think, to me, he seems to be like the more polished guy. I talked to some people in and around the Mannheim club recently, and now that they're back in camp, they're saying that somehow over this pandemic time, this guy's found a way to turn it up a notch from there. So by all accounts, he's going to start the season in Mannheim. You know, they expected to start, I think, in November. You know, the National Hockey League expected to start in December. So he'd probably end up being there for 2 weeks, maybe a month. But to see that or hear that he's taken those strides already is really impressive. Now, when it comes to Quinton Byfield, you know, he's already had that opportunity to play on a World Junior team. He's already had the opportunity to play on a Sudbury team where he's the focal point. And I think those are really good learning experiences. Now he has to go out on the ice and take it a step further. Be more dominant in terms of being able to produce points, which is already a strong suit. Maybe apply himself a little bit more physically. Maybe start to show some of those leadership qualities that you typically see from a player who goes from as a young guy at a World Juniors, where he's sitting there not saying anything, to becoming a leader. And I think those things are going to be really key kind of points for Byfield to hit on moving into next year. But I think I have STUTZLE at 2. I have Byfield at number 3.
Let's go through some of the other players here that you have in your top 10. Some really interesting names. And there's a kid from Frölunda, Lucas Raymond. You still have him at number 4 as we talk on this evening?
Well, you know what, Jeff? Like when the first 7 of the 8 teams were decided back on June 26th in the draft lottery, we did a mock 8, if you will. Yeah. And so that appeared on Sportsnet. And at that point, when I looked at, there's one thing to have rankings, and I think it's an entirely different thing when you're looking at projecting what teams will do. So when it comes to a mock draft scenario, I look at Cole Perfetti as being the fit for Detroit at number 4, just because there's so much. Well, there's a lot of knowledge there. I mean, part of the ownership group in Saginaw includes Jim Devellano and Chris Osgood. Yeah. And the fact that they're right in the Red Wings' backyard, Steve Yzerman, as the general manager, would have had more than ample opportunity to see this player. I understand that there's a relationship with Chris Draper and Cole Perfetti, where it was Perfetti using Draper's off-ice fitness guru, Pete Renzetti, over the course of last offseason, and likely doing that again here during the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of really good ties there. Mm-hmm. And then, you've had an opportunity to meet Perfetti. He's a wonderful young man. So when it comes to character, I think that stuff's already taken care of. He thinks the game well, really good offensive player. And I think there just seems to be that synergy there with Detroit picking at 4. Now, if Detroit's in 3, I don't think they go that direction. But with Detroit sitting in 4, that's where I have Perfetti in terms of a mock. But I do want to talk about Lucas Raymond, no question.
Yep. It's an interesting point that if they're at 3, you don't think they take them. This is don't forget, this is the general manager that took Moritz Seider really high last year. And we all said, why not trade down? And Steve Yzerman said, we knew the player we wanted. We went and got him. Tell us about Lucas Raymond, though.
Yeah, so Lucas Raymond is one of those guys who's really light on his feet. He's an excellent playmaker. He does so from the wing. He's always been a guy to excel, even at the age group above his age, and he's always played in that age group above his age. So I think when you can have proficiency as a younger player playing with older players, it really speaks to how successful you can be, and it speaks to your projections. The thing is, people are going to look at what this guy did when it comes to his SHL numbers, and they weren't all that impressive. Well, he wasn't given a great opportunity to play a ton of minutes in the SHL, so you consistently have to go back to playing with his peer group to properly assess this player. And I think when you look at a guy who can affect the game with being light on his skates, being edgy, being an excellent playmaker, and also having the ability to score goals, yet having to face and play through the adversity of always playing above your age group with bigger, stronger, faster guys, he's a player that I really like. But oddly enough, when I kind of go through this mock scenario, I'm looking at some of the teams and what I think might be better fits, and I'm not so sure this guy, it's a bit of a stretch, but right now I think I'd have him in the 9 hole, and it's probably not likely to happen for him to go that low. But let's rewind the tape a little bit. Lafrenière, STUTZLE, Byfield, Perfetti, a bit of a reach maybe at Detroit, but I think there's such a good fit there. Then you go back to Sanderson. You look at DRYSDALE. Now you got Marco Rossi in the mix, and all of a sudden, hey, wait a sec, where's Lucas Raymond? Is it in the 8 hole to Buffalo? Is it in the 9 hole to what we now know as being Minnesota? Or am I completely wrong with all the success that Ottawa and Detroit have had with Swedish players? Maybe they go the direction of Raymond as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Marco Rossi there a second ago, and Andre Tourigny, the head coach of the Ottawa 67s, did a remarkable job. Like, what a disappointment it was. We didn't get that Ottawa 67s, Peterborough Pete's matchup, which every time those two teams got together, they were fantastic games. But front and center, every time I would watch the 67s, and you were there to watch them live, Marco Rossi jumped out. Tell us about the Austrian.
Yeah, so this is a guy who really at a young age, he's an Austrian-born player, and in order to make himself better, his dad was forced to lose his job so that he could drive him back and forth to Switzerland, where the hockey was a little bit better. So he played as a pro, I believe, at 16 years old. And when it comes to Marco Rossi, the number one knock on him is his size. But as we've seen, the NHL's gotten a lot smaller. Sure. But here's a guy, when you look at him, his lower half speaks hockey player. And now you bring him over. Part of the reason why he came over to play with Ottawa is because there was a connection through Nico Hischier, through Andre Tourigny, who Hischier played for in Halifax the one year that Tourigny was there before Hischier went and played for New Jersey. and felt like this would be a great person for his development. So now he, Austrian born, playing in Switzerland, leaves there, comes over to North America, plays for Andre Tournier. And right away, Tournier is like, whoa. Even the year before this year, Andre Tournier is telling me, like, buddy, this guy I'm telling you is a top 5 player all day long. Why? Well, he's got unbelievable work ethic, crazy competitive. His practice habits are right off the chart, and we haven't even gotten to the skill yet. So when you marry the will and the skill together, which I think is what you have with Rossi, you're talking about a player who led the Ontario Hockey League in scoring. He's had 2 really good years playing, in the Ontario Hockey League with the Ottawa 67s. It makes those around him better. And the one thing is the smarts. That's what sticks out. He is constantly doing video work, trying to improve himself, trying to improve his game, constantly challenging the coaches about positioning and different things that are happening in their systems, to the point where the coaches are saying to themselves, well, this guy's not doing it to be a jerk. This guy's doing it because he legitimately thinks the game at such a high level that he can think on the same level as his coaches. So there's a lot to like in this package. The one knock against him is his size, as I mentioned earlier. So it'll be a fascinating guy to watch. I've had him in my 5-hole all year, but when I'm looking at where the teams are, so on and so forth, I don't necessarily know that happens now because of how it's set up with Ottawa picking at 3 and 5. I think they go center and D. And I don't think they take Rossi at 3, and I think they do take a D at 5.
Okay, let's talk about those D then. We have Jeff Sanderson's kid, Jake Sanderson. We all know the story last year in Vancouver. The draft was how many kids in the U.S. program are going to go in the first round. It all started with Jack Hughes and finished up with John Beecher going to Boston. Tell us about Jake Sanderson, and also tell us about Jamie Drysdale, slick skating defenseman, Lisa Clark-Klein all day long with the Erie Otters. Tell us about these 2 D.
Yeah, unbelievable. So I think it starts with Drysdale for me. And so this is a guy who at the start of the year was challenged by his coach, Chris Hartsburg, to be the guy every single night. And so he's starting to play. There's a little bit of inconsistency. He's putting up a decent amount of points. And all of a sudden he gets invited to Canada's World Junior Camp, which was in my backyard. So I went out and watched him against the U Sport stars, guys that are 23, 24, 25 years old. And they're playing for keeps. They're bumping the body. I mean, they're getting after it. Gardner McDougall, the UNB head coach, was their head coach, and he takes no prisoners when he's coaching. He expects that same mentality out of his players. So he goes in there against these men, and they're dumping pucks in his corner, and they're trying to run them, and they're trying to work them in front of the net. And Drysdale is so calm and so poised. On his way back to retrieve pucks, he's already assessing the situation. He turns, a quick move, avoids the first forechecker. Now he's got a little bit more time to assess. Good, crisp pass. Oh, no, that's not an option available to me. I better skate the puck out, get in the neutral ice, make a pass. All right, line change. I'll get to center. I'll dump it. So this guy has great ability to produce or process the game at such a high speed. When it comes to Drysdale, the first thing you think about is his skating ability. And how is that going to help? Well, the new age guy who can transport the puck, but also defend in a new age manner, in that when pucks are free or when they're in the corner, using good stick skills to get it out, using that elusive skating ability to avoid the forecheck and move pucks and transport it quickly and get into the transition game. So Drysdale's a guy who I think still has some untapped offensive potential. He's a little bit smaller than Sanderson. And when I look at Sanderson, I'm looking at a more well-rounded guy who has some of that old school bite to his game. So here's a guy who at the start of the year, again, you talk about his great skating ability, very similar to what his dad Jeff did in National Hockey League. And then as the year starts to move on, he realizes that, hey, we're going to need a little bit more offensively out of me. So he starts to really kind of bring that part of his game out and expose that part of his game. So in the second half, now all of a sudden he's a guy that they're leaning on from defense in the back end. And when you look at the entire picture, you're looking at a guy who can play a mean, nasty defensive game, a guy who can move the puck, a guy who's got NHL bloodlines, and a guy who has size. And for me, when I'm looking at him and Drysdale, and I'm looking at where the situation is with Ottawa at 3 and 5, that's probably something they could use a little bit of, some of that size and bite in the back end to complement what would be Thomas Chabot back there. So I'm looking at Sanderson.
I was going to say, close your eyes, Sammy, and say, okay, who can I see playing with Thomas Chabot, Drysdale or Sanderson?
Well, it's like a Werenski-Jones type of scenario,
Yeah.
where you have two good guys who you trust so much that you allow them to do whatever they want to do. Obviously they have great chemistry. They can provide offense. They skate well enough that they get into trouble, they can get back. And so I could definitely see that being a good 1-2 punch for Ottawa down the road.
You have a thought on Alexander Holtz from Djurgården?
Yeah, goal scoring ability. And when I look at where I slotted him was with Buffalo at number 8, because I think that's something that they really need to address. Is he as well-rounded maybe as a Lucas Raymond? No, but the one thing that sticks out is the ability to score goals, and that's such a coveted thing in today's game because of how difficult it is to score, especially 5-on-5, and I think that's something that Holtz can do. His numbers compare really favorably with given more opportunity than what Raymond was given in the SHL, and so I do think that some extrapolation can be taken from that, and a guy who, he's kind of a one-trick pony, but it's a pretty good trick that he has.
You mentioned goal scoring a second ago, and with that, we'll not finish up quite yet because I want to get your thoughts on a couple other players here, but tell us about Jack Quinn. I mean, every team in the CHL craves a player that, I don't want to say coming out of nowhere, but a player that just, boom, puts it all together and starts filling the net like he did this year.
Yeah, and this is a process, Jeff, that started with Quinn going back to last year. As a younger guy on a veteran-laden Ottawa team, he was playing more back-of-the-bus minutes. But that also gave him time, and he was smart enough to take that time to develop and wasn't necessarily, worried or at least didn't complain about not getting the top-notch minutes and the top-notch opportunities to produce offense. He scores 12 goals. Not bad. Well, during that time, he started to really work on the details of his game, whether it be in practice, playing with or against Rossi, or going up against guys like Kevin Ball, who are big monster powerhouse guys. And then you're looking at a guy who, all right, positioning, where do I go? What do I do? And was constantly challenged by Andre Tournier to say, listen, if you want more high leverage minutes, here are some of the things you need to do. You need to shore up your game away from the puck. And so he took that to heart. And in the offseason, he worked his tail off. He comes back. He goes from 12 goals to, 52, 55 goals with the Ottawa 67s. And the thing that scouts are looking at are like, wow, if this guy can have that kind of year-over-year improvement, and he's got, he's slight of frame, but he's got a frame that you can pack some muscle onto. And so I look at a little bit of physical immaturity, and I look at a guy whose game has grown by leaps and bounds. And I think that's the thing that excites scouts the most.
Great job here, Sam. I'll look forward to more draft coverage here at sportsnet.ca. Thanks, Sammy.
Awesome, Jeff. Always a pleasure. Thanks.